Okay, welcome to the American Center in Moscow's program. We are glad you're joining us today. We have a great guest. Her name is María Fernanda Chamorro. She is an award-winning poet, awarded the Norma Elia Cantú Award in Creative Writing. Her poetry explores the intimacy of sisterhood, the anchor of intergenerational coexistence, and grief. She appeared at the National Mall and Memorial Parks, the National Museum of American History and Culture, Hamburg, Germany's NDR Kultur, Greece's Rosemary House, the Ecuadorian American Cultural Center, Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts, and a co-presenter with the U.S. Embassy of Suriname, and more. María Fernanda is a published contributor of the Library of Congress. María Fernanda is a recipient of literary appointments from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Academy of American Poets, the Arizona Commission on the Arts, and the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities. She is an inaugural Academy of American Poets Poetry Coalition Fellow. She has served as the Black Artists and Designers Association Secondary Advisor at Arizona State University and a guest speaker for Lincoln Center Education as an artist in the industry. She is a two-time Best of the Net nominee. María Fernanda partners with performing arts centers, museums, public libraries, and more nationwide to support their programming and cultural landscapes. María Fernanda is a Callaloo Fellow. She is the founder of 4 independent programs, including a poetry garden, where Black literary artists and horticulturalists discuss their creative and historic connections to gardens. Learn more at mariafernandapoet.com and at Poetry with María Fernanda. So I am pleased to present María Fernanda, who will share with us some of her poetry.
Thank you, Joy Jones. I'm excited to be here with you, a fellow DC lover. As for those who don't know, DC is my hometown. And I'm so excited to be here with everyone this evening. And I wanted to start with a poem that just shares what I love about poetry. It's called Why I Love to Read. Let me make sure I have also my timer going. Just a moment. Why I Love to Read for the Massachusetts Reading Association. My ink gathers as often as dew. Each word I place on the page is a blade, a grass leaf, and a pirouette to bloom. This is how I recover the last time I smiled with you. So I had this beautiful opportunity to visit the Massachusetts Reading Association at one of their annual conferences, and it was focused on literacy. And I just thought, why do I love to read? What can inspire other people to think about reading? And for me, it's really the relationship. It's another reason why I love writing. So I am a huge traveler. I love to travel across the US if I can get the chance. Typically, there's a friend on the other side of that. And so I'm going to share a series of poems throughout this reading that really reflect on my time in Arizona. I spent about 3 years in Arizona. Before that, I was in New York for about 10 years. And no matter what city I was based in, DC was always my constant, continues to be my constant, my home base. So when I was in Arizona, though, I did fall back in love with my love for the blues. One of my favorite blues artists is Howlin' Wolf. And so I was listening to a lot of his music just by happenstance while I was out there. And this poem is inspired by that. Opaque, after Howlin' Wolf. So I sing, tell my people what shape I'm in. Arid evenings I ripen opaque. Night blooms, desert moon alights my skin a dark carnelian. This eve narrows my figure to a spear. My desert shadow seeps inward, and I remember Elizabeth Catlett already smoothed my lips between her fingers. I am a soft stone, not so different from every fine grain, once a fossil. I am a celebration of forming within. This poem reflects on the Elizabeth Catlett exhibition that was in New York a few years ago, I believe in 2017. There was a small exhibition of hers in New York, and it was the first time I got to see her pieces in a retrospective. And so it just felt really amazing recently to see that at the National Gallery of Art. But I mentioned Elizabeth Catlett, for those who may not know. She's a famous artist from Washington, D.C., and she actually lived in Mexico for about 50 years of her life. And I just have always felt so akin to her work. In particular, she's a sculptor. She also does wood carving, but I mentioned her sculpture work because when she would create these sculptures, she wrote that in her journals that she was thinking of Black women in the same reference in which maybe all of us think about buildings in DC, like the just the slabs, the marble, just the grandeur that buildings have. You can see in Elizabeth Catlett's work, her work is very angular. And so she wants us to see Black women with the same sense of monument, which I just love and grew up feeling so proud of. And so I needed a little bit of that energy when I was in the desert. So thinking about DC, one of my favorite seasons in DC is autumn. So here's a poem, one of the few poems that I enjoy rhyming in, and it's called Autumn in Washington, D.C. An insect bumps against my chest, flutters up my collarbone, a sort of steady stepping stone. In the air, fireflies trail a polygraph test, their thin strings of lightning jest. Around my ankles and elbows, mosquitoes sniff for fine bloodlines sewn in circles. They gallop up my skin, a widely spun muscle nest, to and fro. Did you see the moths whisking smoke, propelling themselves toward the freshest flame? This once prophesied by a purple tarantula with one straight leg. Every insect has its own special way of staying about. This is DC in the fall. At least one insect will stay a little longer, always keeping the earth on its toes. I had a chance to read at DPR, Department of Parks and Recs here, and one of the series they do is Jazz in the Park. And I thought that would just be such a fun poem to do with live jazz improvising behind me, really alongside me. And it was just so much fun. So if you ever find yourself in DC during the summer looking for something fun and free to do, definitely check out Jazz in the Park. I have another poem about Arizona. And this is more about what Joy Jones had referenced in terms of my practice earlier. I really enjoy writing about sisterhood. I write about grief, and a lot, I think, ultimately about distance, whether that's distance over time or distance over across like emotional distance. And so this poem touches on that a little bit. To give you a sense of place, in Arizona, where I was it was the Sonoran Desert. And for those who may know, or may not know, the desert, some deserts are former oceans. And, oceans have turtles. And what I learned is that deserts also have desert turtles. So this poem was a little bit inspired by just spending days looking at desert turtles while I was in the desert. It's called Neither Motionless. The Sonoran sun will press a calcite crease through a desert line. Sharp winds compose mineral gardens out of leaf litter and shedded tortoise shells. Kenna collects our distance like a brain assembling time, our relationship now divided by state lines and time zones is this page. A limestone rock knows light from many directions without a name. A creosote exhales, a creosote inhales. My skin is a tense maze of scales peeling. I soften at each word alone, anew. When Kenna visits, I unclutch my every appendage. She is pulling in her every limb, her head, her legs, her love crowding her carapace. She sinks into the coarsest desert sand, and we wait, assembling our sound. I really enjoy the idea that when we create memories and when we think back to memories in our mind, the brain is actually always reassembling it every single time. And so that's why I think, speaking positively to ourselves is so important, because it is literally what your brain is working from in order to remember something. So I always think that's really special. All right, I'm going to read a bit of a longer poem, so just get comfortable. I'm a huge letter writer. I love the epistolary form, which is essentially that. And so I want to acknowledge that in 2017, there was a Hurricane Maria that hit Puerto Rico. And I was living in New York at the time. I had several roommates at one time. I think there was maybe about 5 of us. And we had a new roommate who had just maybe lived with us for maybe a week or two. And she shared at some point in that time that she hadn't heard from her father after this hurricane. And even though we didn't know each other, I just felt so moved to just attempt writing something that let her know that we feel for her, that we might not understand what she's experiencing, but that we feel for her. So I took a piece of paper from my notebook. I took some time and I was writing this poem, and I actually put it under her door. And I just hope that she understood that I was sharing it with the most respect. And she opens her door and she was just like lit up, right? It really was the beginning of our friendship, actually. And I have received her permission to share this publicly. And I just think this poem is about, it really speaks to me as in terms of the magic of poetry, of what can poetry do. So again, longer poem, take your time, and here we go. It's called Yours, after Ross Gay's Spoon. Ross Gay is an amazing poet. Please check out his work. Who buries bocaditos in their bedroom at 3 a.m? Jibarro after jibarro. Their corners and curves, she tastes Miami and its breeze, then creases the plastic canopies, crackling, mimicking almond tree leaves in the fall. When she rewraps cara marroyo, half-eaten, guayaba intact, dulce de coco for Sunday, y pilones resembling cocoons of her childhood, rolling about her palm of her memory, as she sings on Hostos campus, from which she prints sheets of music and stretches a canvas on wood to bring home, making more hiding places for her candies, which arrive home with me that evening in a United States postal package a month after Hurricane Maria. The cardboard box echoes a church pew's songbook in its size, but with the edges kissing between the extra tape to hold long past the weeks of rising and landing helicopters and maybe boats run by hands of postal carriers softening down La Calle Verus Belvis before finally returning to work that mid-October in San Sebastian, with her father drove hours to deliver his mail. He craved the wind, Castañer, Puerto Rico. I read the town's name scribbled in a thinning ink on the corner of the box, jumping from the jaw of the narrow-dented mailbox in the lobby of our New York apartment, in front of which I make a wish to reserve even this first joy for her, my new roommate, Brisa. I carry her box, eyes closed, to our front door where Brisa's giggles soar about her. Every girl, yes, sharpens the creases of her smile as she lists chemicals being injected into grocery store peanuts, remedies for sleeping, and the ways to befriend this Leo, because we Leos, we don't be befriending everybody. But the first time Brisa and I laughed, We hit the floor dancing and swinging our flower-patterned skirts, giving the wind its backbone. We sang to Celia's Bimba Calora, to which Brisa cued me in like we'd been sisters years ago. And the sun always joins by lending itself to our kitchen, where Brisa opens the package to a limited edition of Cortázar's Hopscotch, a torn news clipping from Primera Hora, centering its words around a photograph of El Yunque, gleaming before and now, looking like an image in a faded textbook. How it reminds Brisa of her father, a generous man who would take the shirt off his back for anyone and talk on the phone all night about people organizing a little more every day, and the government helping him now more than ever, which Brisa knows is not the truth. The truth is he will not hint at danger. He wants her to know that he is okay and that he needs her to stay in New York, equal her guitar playing to her singing, and to remember these sweets, these candies will always be how he reminds his Brisa of home, the same way the candies remind him of Brisa. And this is why she buries los jibaros all over her room like acorns as a means to keep her memory fresh. Thank you for indulging me with this poem. I really, really just really loved that connection that I was able to have with her and still have, because there was a moment where I thought she might see this poem and rip it up and be upset and say, you know, it could have been anything. You never know where people are, and it would be understandable, and I would still be grateful that she even took a moment to read it. But instead, what happened is she came out, like I said, face aglow, and I read it at the Bronx Museum. And in the poem, because she knew it was coming, she shouted, "Girl, yes!" in the middle of it, and it just was beautiful, because I was not only sharing her story, but I think she recognized that I was sharing a story of other people's that we were still trying to find words around at the time. And so, and even in this time where I think about Hurricane Melissa, I really hope people are thinking of ways, in all the myriad of ways, that we can love on each other, support each other, and writing is just one way. Healing to me is very important. And I say that because I had an opportunity to share a poem for an amazing project called the Healing Verse Poetry Line. This is a project where you can dial a number in Philadelphia. You can dial it wherever you are in the US, wherever you are in the world, but the phone call will go to Philadelphia, and you will basically come upon a phone line that's been curated by poets Yolanda Wisher and Trapeva B. Mason, and you'll be greeted by a poem. So you call this phone line and you'll hear a poem, this week's poem, and then you can decide what you want to do next, because they have a phone tree with options for support for various wellness and mental health services. And so, but what a beautiful way to be greeted by a poem every single week. You're welcome to just call and just hear the poem, because that is in itself a beautiful feat. So I had a poem that was selected to be part of this. It's very brief, but I think that I'm really grateful that it spoke to Yolanda and Trapita. So this poem is called On the Healing Verse Poetry Line. I become my silence, an orb weaver's silk cocooning my throat. A fisherman's ghost net enmeshes me, and shallow waters twist into tidal estuary. The harbor begins to make a final space for me. Until I open my mouth, I tear the gill net with fresh teeth. Released, I rush to open air, free and alive. Thank you. And what's great about that phone line is all the poems are, I think they're about anywhere between like 60 and 90 seconds. So it's just it's usually a very nice warm hug. So in thinking about healing, a few years later, I got a chance to go to Venice to celebrate Simone Lee's Loophole of Retreat. I started saying loophole when I said her last name. Simone Lee's Loophole of Retreat in Venice. And Simone Lee is another sculptor whose work I just love so much. I'm thinking a lot about Lorraine O'Grady, who spoke on Simone Lee's work and recognized that Simone Lee's sculptures, you don't see eyes per se. I want to say that loosely. And what Lorraine O'Grady recognizes, another amazing artist, she recognized that Simone Lee's sculptures were looking inward. And so that's something for me that taps into another way of how we connect with each other, how we connect with the world, how we set our own pace, how we set our own sound. And so to have that inner strength and then meet with 300 other Black women in Venice who are also thinking about these themes, it was an amazing time. And so I wrote a brief poem called Embrace about the time I spent with him. My greatest aunt recognizes me. Her lineal breeze steadies the water taxi, revives my exhale. Show me you, she speaks in specular reflections. I watch as she assembles and reassembles all of Venice in her lagoon hands. I spread from a boat, my smile, my wingspan, yes. Afterlife of an afterlife. Rounding an opal glint, a loophole. October, we Black women from all over the U.S. reunion. Our laughter presses into every coral pillar, a fossilization. At the Fondazzini Giorgio Cini, we leave more than anyone will remember. One day, one of our descendants will visit and hear us, their new ancestors, joyous and laughing. One of the best things about that trip, I think it was maybe just a few days we were in Venice all together, was because I had traveled so much, I was seeing my friends from Miami, my friends from Los Angeles, my friends from DC. I was seeing friends from Baltimore. I was seeing friends from, I believe it was Houston, Texas. And it was just amazing that New York. And New York, it was amazing that we were all in the same place, right? We were all there at the same time. And just, I still barely have words. I'm glad I managed to write a poem about it, but it was incredible. Again, as I've shared, I love to travel. So my next poem was actually about a brief moment where I got a chance to go to Turkey. This is a poem about my time in Izmir, and it's called Sun, but I use the Turkish word, which is Ganish. And so that's the title of the poem. And in the poem, I reference prayer, and I'm talking about coming to success. And so I really hope you enjoy this poem. I wake to the call of prayer and Coltrane's Naima wrestling in my bed sheets. Praise soars. Haya ale salah, haya ale falah. I whisper effandom, a word taught to me to say when someone asks for you. Genghis, who cooked dinner and found us laughter all night, respectfully had left before the moon. The hotel sheets reminded me of him, the inside of a fresh almond, and yet not at odds with the sky, nor its morning ballet hue. I practiced calling for someone, but I was calling for somewhere else. Oh, how the most beautiful sun I've ever seen visits my window to make a mirage of a good midday rain. So when I was in Turkey, what was really amazing is I saw the biggest sun I had ever seen, even bigger than when I was in the Sonoran Desert. And I remember this feeling of missing the rain. I am someone who loves the rainforest. I love large rivers and so on. And so to be in a place where you just can't think about the rain because the sun is so beautiful. It was amazing. It was such a great trip. And I got a chance to go because one of my best friends for life, she lives out there, and I was working a couple jobs in high school, and I had saved up enough money so that I could pay for the trip. And it was just, it was an amazing time. But always I found myself returning to my beloved DC. And so this is a poem about traveling around in DC on the metro. I am someone who grew up for a fair amount of time without a car. And so the metro was and continues to be my best friend. And so I'm a person who loves the bus, So this poem specifically is dedicated to the metro. It's called Night Travel. Breathing is a spectacle of darkness so beautiful. I learn moonlight. I live at night. Beyond my beloved train line, train tracks twist into metal snakes. They gasp and gnash under my feet. I live at night, kissing my cool palms and sending kisses to Neptune yards, sheltering broken train cars, to the city's cylinders, shedding a shark skin paint job, and to the familiar fence where I deepen a deboss of my figure every time I watch the city take something else away. We all have the sky, aglow anew every night, looking back, blinking, and still relicking above. This ironclad love lives in the city's every direction. I live at night. My beloved indigo sky absorbs me, and for a moment, I ride under the city pythoning. The train cars flash by like transparent film rolls, a protective coating, black plastic emulsion, and I live here, both the stillness and a glistening comet at the same time. I'm just checking on my time. Cool. So one of the things I love to write about is family. And so these two poems are kind of accidentally a suite. I wrote them within maybe a couple years of each other, and they're both about my grandfather. So I'm just going to read these two straight back to back. It's called What We Do for a Collection of the Dead, with a Collection of the Dead, and the other is called The Art of Inflorescence. My grandfather rearranges hydrangeas by the cut of their stems, like living cells, once split, swift and unheard. Corifolia in pink, he and I untangle living. More beloved lives cusp, grand bouquets of sword lilies and lupines in earth, my grandfather's furniture. He collects his grandson's voice with the living, and I read vignettes about our dear moon. At home, strangers arrive to unplug my cousin's bedside breathing equipment. That was his sound left living. Pressure pushes water out of a long hose like some braided streams open and running after gravity in all directions. Rust is nothing but another living shadow. Every grandfather knows an infiniteness like dried yard leaves. But I, Maria Fernanda, have a grandfather who gives me all of his leaves still living. For those who may have heard in this poem, living is repeating because this is a hustle. And in a hustle, you will have two lines of poetry, a line break, and then another two lines, and you'll repeat that a minimum of 5 times. And the end word is repeating. So there's many types of hustles, even classic hustles, of course, that have an internal rhyme. And so I just wanted to share that, a girl loves a poetry form. I love a poetry form because I also love, making it my own, deviating from it, right? I think the magic of poetry is hearing yourself, finding yourself, and connecting with others. The Art of Inflorescence for my grandfather. This is also based in DC. My brain tissue curls each year tighter like everyone else. Visiting the tidal basin for the first time, I see why the cherry blossom tourist visits. A blush abstraction stirs overhead. Gossamer lace drapes over every branch. A desire to flicker, perhaps people find themselves here. Time leaves lines on people, the tree rings of a good time, of another hour, of an ancestor arising. So I was commissioned to write this poem at a time when, in the middle of that period, my grandfather had unexpectedly passed. And so at the end of the poem, my hope is to acknowledge his transition. This next poem is set in, I'm just going to go ahead and read it. It's called A Sacred Comb after El Anasu, because I'm thinking about the time. Oh, how the sculptor and I left stretch marks in the same silk cotton tree in Ayanco. But he believes in pieces. He pushed a chainsaw steel filed grin into our tree's chest. I asked him to akin me to a red-tailed comet or any bird named after its desire to leave. but he carved me into a comb, stained me fuchsia, gas torched my skin, and left me in pieces. For display, freshly cleft, the curator reorders my severed teeth, oiled and softened for her hands. So that poem is about one of my favorite artists, El Anasu. It's not about it's solely about this piece of work that he has, where it's a set of wooden combs that he's cut from a tree, of course, and he invites any curator that is showing his work or curating his work to rearrange these wooden combs in whatever order they want. And so when I was writing it, what I love about poetry is you don't know where the poem's going to go, you don't know what it's going to bring up. And so I wanted to imagine myself as the wooden combs and what it must feel like to always shift, right? What does it mean to reposition oneself or for someone else to reposition you? And so it was just a really interesting thing for me to explore. One of the last poems is honoring an Ecuadorian tradition where people will build effigies of cartoon characters, of people, of some sort of symbols, right? Effigies are essentially like big, giant, for some people say dolls, but a little bit not quite so that. And they're put on a stick and then they're burned on New Year's Eve. And so I was really fascinated by that. And I wanted to write a poem about it. The poem is called Years That Ask. And those for my folks who love a deep cut, that is definitely referencing chapter 3 of Zora Neale Hurston's Their Eyes Are Watching God. And so I will close on this poem. Years That Ask. New Year's Eve, effigies burn streets, and the year before scorches and screams reverberating through us. Our organs pulsate and our mouths close. Left is our language, outgrowing its own fabric. Everyone claws for a name except their own, like the baby who will not grow larger than an uncle's palm. Everyone remembers her sighs, but I remember the nurses peeling the rind from every orphaned forename, thickened by a second. Left are my 3 syllables, the inner flesh of an orange pulped open, Fernanda. Each seed is a syllable hushed against the dips of my palms like cocoons freshly woven. The orange void darkens, the longest at night. First 2, now 20 years after the first attempt of sleep, I become so restless, locking eyes each night with another woman's pulsating eyes, staring back. I say, if I knew you, I wouldn't speak to glass like family. It is only here on the page I may molten and pour myself. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop there.
María Fernanda, that was delightful. Thank you for sharing yourself and your poetry.
Thank
So, may I ask you a few questions?
Please, please.
So you mentioned that you loved reading, as do most writers. So I'm curious, why did you choose to be a poet rather than a novelist or a journalist or a playwright? Or what spoke to you about poetry that made it your primary form of expression?
I think being vulnerable is really difficult. And poetry has this way of sometimes distilling, but sometimes, you use all of that space. But for me, it just gets to my inner core, my inner truth. I love that no matter what I write, even if I think I'm doing something on the page or whatever, my readers can see. Every reader can see what's really happening beyond even what I see. I'm a big lover of Aimé Césaire's work, and one of the things that he says, and I'm paraphrasing, is that my readers know me better than anyone else. And I think what I love about poetry is that you can try to dress it up as much as you want, but the core truth of what you're saying, a true reflection of self, is clearer than any mirror in a poem. And I love that.
You mentioned that you like to write letters, and that warms my heart as a very old school analog person myself. And I do have a few friends that I write letters to, but I miss the art of letter writing. Tell me more about why you like letters and if you still write letters.
Absolutely. Right now, I write mostly postcards. I think I'm pretty sure it probably had to do with pen pals and maybe a school assignment when I was growing up in elementary school.
Mm-hmm.
But I just fell in love with the idea that you're sending something to someone, right? There's this part of you that you're kind of sending away. And I know I'm saying this again, but I've always thought that a letter is a form of mirroring as well. I'm trying my best to share a part of myself for you, right? I'm offering. When I was in, I believe it was second grade, we got an assignment where we were asked to keep a notebook for a week or something. And I have been keeping notebooks for 30 years since then, or 30 something years. And that I used to write like Dear Diary, or, essentially I'm writing to myself. And then when my family and I would go on, if we were lucky and we would go to a trip or something over the summer, and maybe I met a friend on the beach. I've always been a very social person. We would become pen pals. And so I was maybe like 12 or something. And I would start writing a stranger who was another girl my age. And maybe we wrote for like 2 or 3 months to each other. And so something about it was just the pacing. The last thing I'll say about it is, I love the pacing of a letter. I love that you can take your time. I love that people can also take their time. You can set your own rhythm. I'm not rushing anyone in the way that maybe a conversation might feel rushed, in a quick passerby, right? But with a letter, I'm like, wow, this person sat down, and I also too sat down. It's something about it. I love the ritual of it.
Mm. Who or what helped you cultivate your voice as a writer?
That's a great question. So many people. I think that my voice has been cultivated. I love the way you asked that question. Um, I'm pausing because I really want to reference one of my mentors, Holly Bass, and I'm going to reference her, Holly Bass, because even though she and we didn't do writing workshops together, anything of that nature, just I had a chance to essentially be her poetry assistant for some time,
Mm.
and she was someone who was just always herself. When we would work together in her house, like, she sometimes would make dinner for us, and we would just sit in like this beautiful quiet. And I never felt like I didn't have to be someone I wasn't. And I think that practice of just being around her and seeing someone who is a full-time artist, a
Mhm.
spectacular artist, um, seeing that as a teenager was he had a huge impact on my practice in terms of, on the page. And she's an amazing poet. But on terms on the page, once I was in college and so on, I read a lot. I continued to read a lot of Araceli's Girmay, Amy Césaire. I mean, I just love Gaillard, Notebook of a Return to My Native Land. Um, I would also say, who else? I mean, Patricia Smith. Congratulations to her for her recent win. She's an amazing artist who just over the years, right, been listening to her work and thinking, wow, like you really are able to reflect this inner self, and then we all get to participate in this beautiful way. So
Mm.
definitely those are a few of my major people. Oh, Robin Cost Lewis. I have to say Robin Cost Lewis because a lot of my family is from Louisiana. And Robin Cost Lewis is from Louisiana and lives in LA, to my knowledge. And I just read her work and I felt so seen and broken open. And
Mm.
you know,
You talked about how much you love your hometown, Washington, D.C., but I also hear you talking about Germany, Suriname, Turkey, and now you're addressing a Russian audience.
yes.
Uh, how did you become so global? And why is it important to reach people outside of Washington, D.C., or even the United States?
So I want to first say that growing up in DC, I did not want to leave. I didn't want to leave for college. I wanted to stay here. I just felt so comfortable. When you grow up in a city, and this was my experience in DC, when you grow up in a city that is that loves Black people so much, where Black people love themselves so much, and we have this opportunity to be so like publicly creative and inventive in this way, and collectively it's powerful. So when you go somewhere else and that might not be the case, it is a change. So the impetus to leave happened because I had a really dear friend, in high school, who said you should send your poems for college to to a school. And I was like, I can do that. I had gone to Duke Ellington and I was in the writing department. So I was writing a ton there. And I got into a college and I sent my poems. And so I went to New York, and I did not know the difference between Brooklyn and Queens. I didn't know what a borough was. We have wards. Like, I was confused. And I love that I even have that memory of not knowing that, because now, after living in New York for 10 years, it just really opened my mind also to the rest of the world in terms of like geography and conditions and just what it's like to be someone from somewhere else. But I have to say, DC also, it really opened me up to that linguistically, I will say, because in 1 week I could hear my friends who are German speaking, my friends who I'd spend time at their house, and their parents would refuse to speak English, right? They just spoke in German. My little friend, like me being little, could translate for me. So I had friends growing up who spoke only in Russian, only in German, only in Italian, and definitely one of my best friends, Ege, only in Turkish. Um, and it was amazing. And then I'm at school and we have maybe like, 200 people who are Nigerian speaking all these different languages, like Kedu. Like, I love languages. And I think it's because it's an expansion of the self. And it's, I don't know, I love that. I love multilingualism. I just think it's fun. I think there's parts of myself that I don't know yet. And then the next thing you know, I'm thinking about, you know, like Igbo, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I didn't know I liked that, but I learned it because I started learning words. So ultimately, I have to say just one more. I know I'm going on this question, but I think ultimately my main inspiration for travel was Maya Angelou. I used to work at the Library of Congress in the Poetry and Literature Center. I worked there for a summer, and one of the things I was charged with was listening to the audio archive. And in that audio archive, they had a not yet released, now it's released in public, interview with Maya Angelou in her 30s when she was traveling with Porgy and Bess. And one of the things that she said is that there would be certain countries that they would visit where they were afraid to leave because maybe the assumption was that they weren't as familiar with Black people. And Maya Angelou, and definitely in some of those countries they were right. But what was amazing is Maya Angelou was like, I am human, right? We've all heard this. I am human. How are they different from me? And so she would go out and she would listen and she would be, and she thought the risk of being out there and being public was so worth it so that she could also learn another culture. And so hearing that as a 19-year-old or so, I just was like, well, if Maya Angelou wants us to travel, like I'm going to travel. And so, yeah, I hope that.
Do you speak other languages?
I speak Spanish. I know a little bit of Turkish, good as shouldest. And what else? I like to pick up pieces of languages, so I know different phrases and stuff. But I would say that Spanish and English are my main. Um, but French is so similar to Spanish that when I was in Paris earlier this year, it was like I was like, oh, I know what he's saying to me, but I can't say it back to him. I cannot speak that accent, but they would understand me in Spanish. So I think it's a matter of like how you vibe. I can't believe I'm saying this, but how we vibe with each other, right? There's a vibe. Like we're all human, as Maya Angelou would say.
Mhm. I read you have a program called the Poetry Garden. What
Mhm.
is the connection between plants and poetry?
I love that question. So this program happened by accident in a great way. So I came back to DC after living away for 13 or so years. And a lot of my friends were part of co-ops, food justice organizations. I met gardeners, really amazing, like Black entrepreneurs who were florists, things like occupations like that. And of course, I'm just super immersed in the writing world here and the various worlds of poetry. And I just thought, we are really well represented in DC. Why don't we come together? So I wanted to create a program that also put money in the pockets of people who I thought just weren't getting their day. Maybe because they're an introvert, maybe because they're not in the right, they're not being invited into certain rooms or something like that. I want to, and so a poetry garden really stemmed from my love for DC as a city in the terms of our history. And I was myself was just getting lost in the city. Like I remember the moment I came out. It was like anywhere between 2011 2013. I came up out of Shaw Howard, like the metro stop, And I got lost because there was so much glass. And I was like meeting a friend or something. Again, been here for my whole life. And I never thought that I could lose myself because the buildings were so confusing. And so a poetry garden is about retracing DC through its gardens and lands, through the dirt, really, I should say. And so we talk about former gardening clubs that, used to be around H Street, which isn't around where I grew up. And it's this beautiful way to recollect. I know I'm saying this a lot, even in my poetry, but it's a beautiful way to recollect our history and also move forward in our vibrancy and feel empowered by the history that we have here, and not rely on these structures that are constantly being taken away or destroyed or not served as well as they could be served. And so that was really the avenue.
Mm. Tell me a little bit about your creative process. Do you write every day, or do you wait for inspiration? Do you have a ritual? How does that work for you?
I think it depends on. I dream in poems a lot.
Mm.
I'll just be, that moment when you're going to sleep and you're about to wake up. My mind just starts running on a poem in that moment, like all this, and so I have to get up and like write in my notebook. That's probably how I quote unquote write every day. Um, Definitely that. But when it comes to once I'm awake and I'm like out and about, I used to try to write on every little thing, like notebooks and receipts and stuff. And then I think I heard, yeah, Toni Morrison had said something, again, paraphrase, where she was like, "You think your first draft is the best? It's not." And there was something freeing about that, Joy, of like, oh, okay, if I don't receive every thought that I have, like, it's okay. There was something freeing about that. And so I love thinking about, even now, when a wonderful poet like Ocean Vuong is saying, what happens when we write with the idea that we are like for something or moved to something, right? And I think that for me also reminds me a lot of Nikki Finney, who's a poet that writes so much about occasional poetry. And I love that. Like, what am I celebrating? Why am I writing? Who's it for? And I think that's why it comes so close to me to letter writing, right?
Mm.
I'm not just like, I don't romanticize he wrote a letter to her every single day while he was away. Like, that's beautiful. If you got all that to say, I love that for you. But I'm very much that person that's like, I spent a lot of time on this letter and I'm glad to send it off. And if we write again in 3 months, that's awesome. Like, it teaches me to be grateful for that moment, the present.
Mm. Mm. You've done a lot of different things in a lot of different cities, for a lot of different audiences. What has been your most gratifying literary project?
Oh, that's a lot. That's a great question. And that's,
For example, for me, I once did a program it was more like storytelling at an elementary
Mm,
school. And I'm recounting the story and telling what happened. It was a Black history presentation.
yes.
And when I first walked in the classroom, I saw that there was one boy's desk that was right by the teacher's desk, separated from all the other children. And so
Mhm.
I'm thinking, oh, he's the troublemaker. That's why that's why his desk is right by the teacher's desk. And so I said, I need to keep an eye on him in case he tries to do something disruptive. But he was quiet the whole time I was presenting. So at the end, I said, are there any questions or comments? And that little boy raises his hand. And he says, that was the best story I ever heard. And like all of the children turned in their seat and said, what? He paid attention in class? Because he was typically so bad that he never paid attention to whatever the lesson was. And afterwards, as the teacher and one of the students was walking me to the door, I said, who was that little boy who said that was the best lesson he had ever heard? And the little girl said, oh, he's the worst boy in the whole classroom. So, so I felt good that I had said something that engaged his interest and imagination. So that's one of my most gratifying moments as an artist, that I was
I
able to reach
love it.
that little troublemaker.
I think that just gives me so much life, because I think we never know what's going to light a student up, right? I really love working with adults. I do a lot of work with young people, but I particularly love working with adults because I think um, a lot of my teaching experiences are really teaching adults that they have everything they need, right?
Mm.
Have everything they need, and we forget in a society that tells us to keep searching outward, right? Like Raisin in the Sun and thinking about Walter, who's always leaving. And his mother's like, you got everything here. Why are you leaving? And I think poetry is like that. It reminds you of who you are. So particularly what comes to mind is really like working with Black girls in art spaces. I did a program with Black girls in art spaces. I had always like a dream on this program because they come out of Dallas, Texas, but they're super international. And so we got a chance to connect here in DC with one of their like chapter leads. And we did a program that was on genealogy in terms of like a poetry form. So essentially, you know, in like a genealogy chart, you have like person and then so on. Instead of having names, you replace that with lyric. And so we were reading this incredible poet who's the person I have emailed about this and talked and geeked out over this with is Sarah Hustle Ali. And she's the first time I saw this. She's the reason why I first saw this form. But when I was teaching her work, when I was teaching her work to an all Black woman core class, I think everyone was probably in their late 20s, early 30s. I think like people were in tears. Like it was amazing. Like I, as a like facilitator, just was wishing I was a participant because we were able to read this work and see ourselves and hear our voices and hear like what we imagine family to be, right? It wasn't just, oh, I'm quote unquote dealing with my own family line. It was more like people have the choice of like, I could honor my family as is. That's totally beautiful. And I could imagine what I want, like, what does a family line look like in my head differently, right? Or what does genealogy mean? Because sometimes genealogy is someone's writing a poem just about their earrings, right? And it's like, okay, so these are the minerals that made these earrings, and we're going down, and by the time you get to the bottom, I'm at my earrings, right? So it was a really open concept, and I think nothing makes me feel, I don't even want to say a negative word. I don't want to say the word not. I feel so free and so recharged when a Black woman sees herself again.
Yes.
That, like, one of the, to your point before, one of the people left the workshop and she said, you know, I'm a lawyer now. And she said, your workshop transported me to who I was before I started college. And I fell out. I was just like, and I you know, my response to her was like, you did that, right? Like, and I appreciate it. And I can hold thanks and appreciate it. And I was like, but you engaged, right? And it was just, yeah, I just think we're beyond magnificent. And so when I see that the work that or whatever I'm putting into the world is able to encourage someone to give themselves another look and to love on themselves, I've done my job. Like that's all that makes me happy.
When did you first start writing poetry?
I started writing poetry. I remember the day. I don't remember what year it was, but I remember, so every morning I used to wake up on the weekends and I would hear the newspaper rustling in my parents' bedroom. They loved the newspaper. My family's very analog. I'm still analog to this day. And I went to their bedroom and they were reading the newspaper, and my mom had a book beside the bedside table. And the book was very tiny. It was like a book of quotes. And one of the quotations I wanted to respond to. And so my mom just handed me a piece of paper and a pencil. And I just started writing on this like really long, like legal pad thing. And it was just, I don't know, it was just this impetus. And I think originally it was a song, like I wanted it to be sung. But I think you know, my mom submitted it somewhere to the local paper and then it was there. And I barely remember that part, but I remember being heard differently. I think that was wild to me. I was like, oh my God, something that like about how I feel and something that makes me happy is circulating throughout the world. And I think, I mean, you know, the neighborhood, but it was like, what I remember is that people around me had another way to get to know me. And like, that was really important to me at the time.
One of the questions from the audience is
Yes.
Someone saying, I'm curious about ancient verse style prophecies like the Delphic oracles and how people interpreted them. How does this kind of meaning seeking and meaning making relate to poetry as an art?
Ooh, I love this. I think poetry is such a craft. It's such a craft. And the craft, I don't say that in an academic way. I say that in the word that I love in English, it's a mocker. Hilton Als, who's in a wonderful essayist, talks about being a mocker, where you're always making something, right? You're just always at your table making, and you're making like this question is referencing meaning. What is meaning for you? One of my workshops that I teach the most, and sometimes I do it when I perform, is I ask people, what do they sound like? Like, what do they sound like when they first wake up? What are their favorite words? What are the sounds that they really enjoy? And this is to make meaning, but I want us in a world where we are constantly told what the pace of existing should look like, whether by media or how we correspond or so on. I always try to bring us back to, well, what feels good to you? And that in itself becomes the meaning. But we won't be able to know what it means if we don't know how it sounds or how it feels, right? Like everyone of any ability can feel the vibration in their chest, right? So that is contributes to who you are and how you think, and that'll always change. But it's really interesting when people aren't thinking, well, how do I write a hustle, or how do I write a sonnet, and how do I address world hunger or something. Instead, like, if you just start with, well, what do you sound like? Oh my gosh, the poems that come out from that are always really interesting and fun.
How does the setting affect your reading or the way your work is received? How is Zoom different from being in a live audience? How is talking to a DC audience different from an Arizona audience?
I think for me, and I'm sure we hear this a lot, but listening is a huge part of my practice. I did not start performing in Arizona until I'd lived there for like a year. Like I didn't come to Arizona to think, oh, I'm going to start performing poems and they're going to love it. And da, 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 da. I wanted to really learn about the Black West. So every Sunday I was going to the main library and reading about like Native Americans and Black people and the history of that area, the Sonora Desert. And it really just made it so that when I spoke to people, I was speaking within a context, right? So sometimes I myself have been part of movement work, and they would have people, and when I say that, like people that are just like hoping to help people make people's lives better through various social services, but mutual aid, right? And so I'm saying that because they would bring in experts from all over the US, and they'd come to Arizona, and these are all Black people in this context, who would say, well, I think we need to work on this issue and this issue and this issue. And then the people who are this like everyday people who are not movement workers but are there and being like, well, I don't have that issue because in Arizona, the way that Blackness exists and how it's treated is totally different from the East Coast. Totally different. And so that is very much relates to how I think about poetry. Like what is gonna be heard? I mean, I could have had a 30-minute reading just about DC poems. Just DC poems. And it was important for me to share instead poetry where I mused on places that I traveled. Like even the poem about Ganesh, about the sun in Turkey, I could not help but include the words that I heard while I was there, right? And because my hope is when someone hears that maybe hasn't been there or maybe has been there, they feel that familiarity, right? Or they learn something new. So I think for me, I try to just be cognizant of where I am. And also what I love about in person particularly is that we probably would be like just chatting a little bit more back and forth because I love seeing people in an audience. And I really, again, you probably know this, Joy, but like we just feed off an audience. We feed off the exchange. And so when that's not there, it is a little more, it's a different experience on Zoom to really gauge how you're being received and if your work is really resonating with people.
Well, I'm confident that your reading resonated with everyone joining us today for the American Center in Moscow's presentation. I thank you for joining us. I thank all of our sisters and brothers in Russia for joining us. And I look forward to maybe connecting with you in person here in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much.